Kevin Stefanski returns to Cleveland with the Atlanta Falcons in Week 14. It's the most interesting matchup on the Browns schedule in 2026.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast, and proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. By the end of this show, we will play the schedule game and give you a full 2026 prediction for the Cleveland Browns. We'll also break down a tough stretch of the schedule in the middle of the unfolding that we'll get to. But first, I've got three most interesting matchups for the Browns on their 2026 schedule, and I get it. This isn't anything new in particular because we knew going in what the matchups are going to be. But the time of year when these things are happening obviously plays a role in how we view what the most interesting games could potentially be for a team and all those different things. And so I have my top three most interesting matchups on the 2026 slate, starting with number 3 on this list for me is the New York Giants game late in the year, Week 15. This is December 20th, so leading into Christmas week. And there's a couple things that I'm thinking about with this one, starting with the fact that, yes, you have a John Harbaugh versus Todd Monken sort of battle here. Todd Monken against his former boss in Baltimore, if you will, and a chance to sort of show what he's building in Cleveland versus what John Harbaugh is building in New York. We know that Todd Monken has talked openly about the fact that he was studying a lot of Jackson Dart tape, thinking that's where he was going to end up, that he could have been the offensive coordinator in New York under John Harbaugh, and that he might not even be in Cleveland right now as the head coach if that would have been the case. And so this game sort of presents as an interesting situation where by then I think we'll have a clear understanding of like who Jackson Dart is as a quarterback. By then we'll also have a pretty good understanding of what type of team the Browns are. Are they playing for quarterbacks in 2027? Or are they sort of set up and having a successful season, maybe in the playoff chase, and things look really, really good for Todd Monken in year one, where you're getting to the end of the year and all of a sudden, oh, okay, you have a situation where he clearly is in a great situation for him, or is he maybe looking back and saying, man, if I had ended up with New York, look what I could be doing. Look where I'd be with Jackson Dart as my quarterback, all these different things. I think it's an interesting one. There's not any bad blood between those two, and I know that kind of drives or rules the day, if you will, rules the day, I should say, when it comes to storylines in the NFL. We like rivals. We like comeback stories. We like revenge games. And obviously there's other ones of those on the schedule. I'd say an honorable mention in that regard is that Buccaneers game where the Browns go to Tampa Bay in Week 2 to face Baker Mayfield, his second time playing against his former team. We know the first time he was with the Panthers, and they lost that game. But I think there's a little less sting to it, or there's a little less juice to it when Kevin Stefanski's no longer here. We know that the relationship between Kevin Stefanski and Baker Mayfield is what sort of soured things here in Cleveland for him. And so I don't know if that one's quite as prominent, but I like this Giants matchup because of sort of the storylines that surround Monken and the fact that he almost ended up there and would have ended up there if he didn't get offered the Cleveland job. And that by that point in the season, we'll have a clear understanding of what both these teams kind of are, who they kind of are as teams, and what directions they're heading. And honestly, like if it's a bad year, there could even be mumbles about Todd Monken not making it until a second season, and then maybe that's where he's going to end up at the end of the season in that next off season as back with John Harbaugh and the Giants staff. So it's an interesting sort of situation, but I like that Giants one as kind of an intriguing one late in the year for Cleveland. My number 2 most interesting matchup. Listen, I get it. When you're thinking about the division, when you're thinking about the AFC North, people are always going to point to the Pittsburgh Steelers first and say, oh man, the Pittsburgh Steelers are the team to beat. It's the most heated rival, the rival that everybody here in Cleveland hates the most. And so I understand what the thinking on that. And those matchups are always going to be interesting, especially knowing what the history is of this team not being able to win in Pittsburgh, and that game comes in week 8. There's the one primetime game on the schedule against the Steelers at home in week 4, a Thursday night game. So that obviously has some intrigue and interest to it as well. But listen, the Steelers could be going through some quarterback turmoil of their own. We don't know who's going to be starting for them. And even if it's Aaron Rodgers, they're a beatable team. We saw that firsthand last year in Cleveland. So I don't know if there's as many storylines for me in that matchup as other than like maybe finally getting the better of the Steelers if you were to sweep them than there are with the matchups against the Baltimore Ravens. And so my number 2 most interesting matchup is, I guess, theoretically both matchups against the Baltimore Ravens, where you have Tom Monken playing against the team that he was working for, where he led these great offenses in with the Ravens, where him and Lamar Jackson seemed like there was maybe, I don't want to say bad blood, but some disagreements that unfolded on his departure or when he left, and that they weren't always on the same page. And, what maybe that kind of brings to the table, him trying to show that he's doing what he wants to do and build what he wants to build in Cleveland, and maybe try to replicate what he did with the Ravens, but do it and beat Lamar with it. I also, though, in that vein, there's also the fact that the Ravens kind of are right now what we're all kind of using as a blueprint for what Tom Monken's offense could theoretically look like. I know the Browns don't have a Lamar Jackson on the roster, unless you think that's Taylor Green, I guess. But he's trying to sort of build an offensive system that follows some of what that looked like, where it's playing to players' strengths, a lot of different weapons, a lot of different options. We've heard the comps to Casey Concepcion we've heard the mocks, we've heard people compare Casey Concepcion a little bit skill set wise to Zay Flowers. So that's kind of what he's trying to replicate and what he's trying to build, at least in our minds. And so can he take what he's building here in Cleveland and following a similar blueprint and beat the team he did it with in Baltimore, maybe once, maybe twice? I think that's a fascinating storyline. And so both those Ravens matches, both in week 6 and then later on in the season in week 16, are 2 that are interesting to me. Specifically, going back to Baltimore, though, as well, is an interesting one late in the season, because that could have some playoff implications for at least one of those teams, depending on how the division shakes out. So I think that's interesting. And then number 1 on this list with a bullet, and I think this one is probably the odds-on favorite to be most people's most interesting matchup for the season, is, of course, Kevin Stefanski's return to Cleveland in week 14, where he'll come to Cleveland with his new team, the Atlanta Falcons, a Falcons team that kind of resembles what the Browns were early on when he first got here to Cleveland, and attempt to, with a little chip on his shoulder, maybe prove that he shouldn't have been fired, or in Tom Monken's case, prove that he was the right decision, and try to prove that the Browns made the right hire and bringing him in here to sort of get this team going in the right direction, that he can do more with similar talents that Stefanski had here than Stefanski did. I think without question that's going to be one that people have circled and are going to be paying attention to. The fact that he gets to come back to Cleveland his first year since leaving is kind of interesting and ironic. And for me, that's number 1 on the list. There's some other interesting ones throughout the season, though. Don't get me wrong. I mentioned the Baker Mayfield narrative. The Titans matchup, I'm assuming Shedeur Sanders starting at quarterback at some point this year, even if Deshaun Watson maybe starts first, whatever. If the Titans matchup is another rematch between Cam and Shedeur, I think that's meaningful. The Bengals games are always going to be fascinating. Fernando Mendoza comes to Cleveland in week 12. What does that look like? Is this a chance to maybe see like what you could have had if you're Cleveland, if he's playing really well? And if the Browns had lost those last 2 games of the season, maybe they could have drafted him. So it's all very interesting, for sure. But I like those 3 I highlighted as my top 3 most interesting matchups. Let me know yours. You can hit me up in the comment section here at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel, or hit me up on X at Spencito_. Speaking of interesting matchups and speaking of the schedule, middle of this schedule presents a tough test for the Browns, where they go on the road for 3 straight games, have some tougher matchups that I kind of am highlighting here. We'll talk about that tough schedule and how it could make or break the Browns season coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. The NBA playoffs are here, and every possession matters. If you're looking to get even closer to the action, you're going to want to head to FanDuel. They have a great offer to get you started right now. New customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's right, turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets just for getting started. And right now in FanDuel, the Cleveland Cavaliers on Friday of this show dropping 3.5-point favorites at home to beat the Pistons and advance on to the Eastern Conference Finals. They're plus 3,000, still really high in terms of the odds to win the NBA Finals. And that's obviously fourth highest in the order behind the Thunder, the Spurs, the Knicks, and the Cavaliers are next. If you are feeling good about the Cavs, the way they're playing lately, you think they might actually make a run and have a shot at winning it all, go to FanDuel right now and bet your favorite team here in Cleveland. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. So there's an interesting stretch of the schedule right in the middle of it that I think is going to sort of make or break Cleveland's, whatever's going to happen to Cleveland this season. And if they're going to be more competitive and maybe keep themselves in that playoff picture, if they're going to be a bad team, I think it all kind of plays itself out in that middle portion of the schedule. I'll explain in just a moment. I do want to remind you about the Everydayer Club. Again, your chance to get Locked On Browns ad-free on whatever audio platform you prefer. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, every other major podcast app. You also get access to a members-only Discord channel where you can interact with hosts like myself, but others from around the network. Just head to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com or check out the link in the show notes to learn more. So the schedule is interesting the way it sets up. There's some interesting stretches, like, for example, from week 7 to week 9, where the Browns are straight up just on the road every single game. Now, one of those is Pittsburgh, not quite as daunting of a trip, but it's the Titans, it's the Steelers, it's the Saints. And that's part of this tough stretch I want to get to. You also, late in the season, you get 4 of your last 6. Or sorry, I apologize. You get from week 10 to week 13, where the Browns don't have to leave Cleveland because they get home against the Texans, bye week, home against the Raiders, home against the Bengals, home against the Falcons, and then you're not on the road again until that December 20th game. So you're basically like home for 5 straight weeks before you go on the road again in late December. So that's an interesting stretch. The beginning is interesting, the fact they go on the road to start the season, but then they're also back-to-back road games, both trips to Florida. So there's a lot of interesting quirks about how this thing laid out and set up. But I do think the stretch of schedule that's going to make or break Cleveland's season is going to be from week 6, where you host the Baltimore Ravens, until that week 11 bye, where you play, again, there's the 3 games on the road in a row, but you get Baltimore, you get the Titans in week 7, you get the Steelers in Pittsburgh in week 8, you get the Saints in week 9, which it feels like the Superdome has been like a house of horrors for the Browns, I feel like, over the years. It just doesn't, I only remember bad games there. I don't know exactly what their record is. I'm going to pull this up here in a second, but it feels like that's always a tough place for them to play, and it's just a tough place to play in general because of the environment. And then the Texans in week 10 back at home. And so, listen, I am fascinated to see what this all looks like in terms of how good or bad the Browns are obviously going to be. But that stretch of the schedule is going to be what makes or breaks how good or bad the Browns can be, frankly. I truly think that it's going to be that stretch that determines whether or not they're in the hunt come December, or in the hunt come November and December, or if they kind of waffle a little bit here. Because it's like the Ravens, again, I talked about the division maybe being up for grabs a little bit with so many new coaches and so many changes in this division, and that could be true. But the Ravens, I think, in by and large, are still going to be considered a team that's going to be good. They're, again, the model of what you're maybe trying to build offensively because of what you've seen the last couple of years, because Todd Monken's now here. Can you sort of replicate that? Can you become them and topple them here in year 1 under Todd Monken? That's a big question. And then you get the 3 games on the road, which is tough no matter where they're played. And then you come back and play the Texans before the bye week. Like if you somehow find a way to take like 3 of that 5, that's huge. That would be a huge momentum swing and tone setter for whatever's to come after the bye week, where you basically, week 12 on, you're playing some moderate opponents theoretically. You got 3 division games worked in there as well, couple NFC games, but it sets the stage for that final 7 games to kind of mean something in terms of, where you're at in the schedule. So to me, it's that middle portion that's going to make or break this thing. And here's the other thing. Like, there's always an opponent that we overlook, and this goes back to what I talked about earlier in the week. When you're mapping out strength of schedule for all these teams in the NFL, using last year's win percentage to make an estimate of how good or bad teams are going to be is always a low-hanging fruit approach to that stat or that question, because, frankly, it doesn't account for the changes made in an offseason. Like, I know we think that the Panthers just kind of universally are just like, they're the Panthers. They won the division last year, even though it was 8-9, and I think they're probably poised to be even better this year. A lot of that depends on Bryce Young, but they've kind of shown some steady progress, right? So I can't sleep on the Panthers in week 3. The Titans are another one. They changed out from having a bad coaching situation, bringing a more competent coach, in my estimation, Robert Saleh. They also add Brian Dable down there now to work with Cam Ward. Like, year 2 of Cam Ward could be really, really good. That's another. They got him more weapons because Cardinal Tate's now there. Like that's another team that I'm looking at, and I'm thinking, man, oh man, they could be sort of under the radar here because we think they stink. They drafted near the top of the draft last year, but maybe they're going to be better. I think the Raiders could have a better season, especially if Fernando Mendoza is who some people think he could be. If he comes and plays well, and he learns the game quickly and kind of gets acclimated to the NFL, in short order, then maybe the Raiders have a better season than expected. The Giants were bad last year. Is that going to be the case under John Harbaugh? And it goes both ways. Like, the Texans made the playoffs last year. They had a really good defense. Maybe there's some regression in there. The Bucs, maybe Baker Mayfield goes back to being a pumpkin, and he's no longer the MVP candidate he was like when he started the season last year. Granted, he tends to start hot. So yes, it goes both ways. But I see some games in here that I'm sure we're looking at right now thinking like, oh man, they should win that game. Or, oh man, this schedule is not too bad overall, or whatever, however you want to kind of view it. And in retrospect, as I think about that tough stretch that includes the game against the Titans, as I think about some of these other games around that tougher stretch, there's going to be some team that going into it, we're kind of underestimating. We aren't thinking is going to be very, very good. And then they're going to surprise us all and actually end up being a better football team than we thought. And maybe win some football games and maybe beat the Browns even. And that's the thing. There's always examples of this. Like, I thought the Jets game was the easiest cakewalk of a win for the Browns last year as possible. And then their special teams did what their special teams did, and they lost that game. Didn't see that one coming. There's always something. And there's also the context here of, like, we don't necessarily know how good the Browns are going to be even. Like, yeah, they could take some steps, but they could also still be middle of the road, but they could also still be really bad in the first-year head coach with a quarterback situation that we don't have a lot of clarity on right now, and they're trying to figure out. Like, there's a lot of rookies. They're banking on a lot of young guys kind of coming into their own quickly. That's not always a recipe for a lot of wins. So there's a lot to be determined, obviously, but I do think that middle stretch, the stretch of the season where it's Ravens at home in week 6, at Titans, at Steelers, at Saints, tough road, a stretch of schedule where you get 3 straight road games. Then the Houston Texans back at home in week 10 is going to be the portion of the schedule that kind of makes or breaks where the Browns are sitting when we get to November, and if they're actually in the hunt, or if it starts to become conversations about like, well, let's just finish the season, how we finish the season for this group, or let's just see how they finish the season, and then get to a point where we start talking about what they need to address come 2027, if that potentially includes the quarterback position as well. All right, without further ado, like to save this for last as always. We're going to play the schedule game by game, week by week. I will give you picks here in the way too early version of this, but it's always a fun exercise, and we'll see how I have the Browns shaking out in 2026. Stay tuned for that coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. If you've ever opened your bank account and thought, well, where did all my money go? You're not alone. Keeping track of subscriptions, spending, and bills can get very overwhelming fast. That's where Rocket Money comes in, helping you take control of your finances all in one place. It tracks your subscriptions so you can cancel ones that you don't need in just a few taps. I love that feature because I'm going to tell you right now, I realized in my bank account there were some subscriptions that I had still that I'd forgotten about, and Rocket Money helped me identify them, cancel them real quick, and keep it moving, so I was actually saving money. You can also set budgets, get alerts, and stay on top of upcoming bills. It just makes everything feel more organized with a clearer picture of your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Just join now at rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, it's the moment we've all been waiting for. I know you waited with great anticipation for me to play my annual schedule game and go week by week picking the results for the Cleveland Browns. This is the version that doesn't count. This is like our preseason version of this. It's all just for fun this week because it's schedule release day, or it was on Thursday, and we get to sort of have this great conversation and play with it a little bit and have fun predicting what we think the record's going to be. But the one that's going to really count, the record prediction that's really going to count, is going to come after training camp leading up to the season, where we've seen some things, we've seen this team out in the practice field, and we have a better indication of who they really are. This is kind of like your blind schedule game, and that's the more, okay, we've seen some things, and now the stage is set. What do we think the record's going to be? So we start off Week 1 at the Jacksonville Jaguars to open things up. Sunday, September 13th. Late start to the season this year, by the way, in that regard. And listen, the Jaguars are a good football team. They were a good football team last year. I am taking Liam Cohen against a Browns team that I think there's still going to be some growing pains, and there's probably going to be some adjustments for what it's worth too, to a new head coach, all those things, versus a Jacksonville team that really showed some promise last year, actually took some steps and some strides, and that Liam Cohen got a lot out of. I like that group. So I'm going to say Jacksonville gets the win there. It's a loss for the Browns. At Tampa Bay, I know everybody wants to see the Browns go in there, waltz in and dominate Baker Mayfield. Maybe not everybody. But I think this one also ends in a loss. Tough to go back to Florida back-to-back weeks. Baker seems to always start the season really well and then sort of wilts later on in the season. So from that standpoint, not the best time to play him. And I do think the Bucs overall are a pretty good football team. Yes, they have some changes there, and that probably matters. But for now, I'm picking this as Baker gets his great revenge against the Browns, who moved on from him. I'll also say this, and maybe this trumps why I should have put the Bucs game as one of my more interesting games in the top. Maybe this would have been a card that maybe this was a part of this game that I didn't think about when I was picking my most interesting matchups. It's the first time, theoretically, you could have Baker versus the quarterback who replaced him in Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson actually starts the season under center, because that first time they played, obviously, it was Jacoby Brissett because Deshaun was suspended. So that's kind of interesting as well. I don't want to underestimate Baker Mayfield when he's on a vengeance path. So I'm going to say the Bucs get that one. Also, I'm not banking on a lot of really good quarterback play if Deshaun Watson's the starter. So 0-2 to start things off. That said, Carolina comes to Cleveland. Home opener for the Browns. City's going to be buzzing. Vibes are going to be high. Somehow, some way, I'm saying the Browns found a way to win that one. It's their first win of the season. And actually, I got them going on a little bit of a win streak here. Pittsburgh comes to town in a short week to play the Browns in their stadium on Thursday Night Football. Again, I think the city will be buzzing. I think we don't know the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh right now, but I don't necessarily think if it's one of the young guys that the Browns are going to be all that concerned. It's early in the season. Teams are still finding themselves. I like the Browns to get an upset win against the Steelers and split with the Steelers in 2026, if that spoils a little bit of where I'm going to go with the other game. But I like a win in that one, and all of a sudden they've won 2 in a row. Then they go to New York for the first time. It's the New York Jets. Again, a game I thought was a gimme last year. I just don't learn my lesson. I'm picking the Browns in Week 5 to beat the Jets on the road in New York. I still just think that the Jets are a team that's playing for draft position this year. They made some improvements. They had a really good draft, I thought, as well. I still think the end goal for them, even with some of the additions they made, is let's get to 2027 and get our quarterback. So with that in mind, I think that the Browns get the win there, and all of a sudden they've won 3 in a row and they're 3-5. That's where the streak ends. This is the beginning of that tough stretch of the schedule, like I mentioned. I think they lose to Baltimore at home in week 6. I'm not sure how to feel about the Ravens. A lot of changes there, obviously. Is Lamar Jackson losing a step? We'll see. But for now, I still trust Baltimore a little bit more than I trust Cleveland. So I'm going to go with the Ravens in that one. They lose again to Tennessee. Like I mentioned, there's always going to be a team that we're underestimating and that we're not necessarily thinking about when it comes to making progress. And I think the Titans could be one of those teams with year 2 of Cam Ward. I think the Titans win that game, and it's 2 straight losses now after the 3 straight wins. We're going to make it 3 straight losses because, like I said, Browns don't win in Pittsburgh. I think they lose that one again. Granted, maybe a benefit to the Browns that they get Pittsburgh in their own barn after Pittsburgh has played that game in Paris against the Saints and come back with some jet lag and all those things. But I still ultimately am going to trust the juju of that building has always said the Browns don't win there, so I'm going to stick with that. Then you get the Saints on the road, and like I mentioned, been a tough place for the Browns to play over the years inside the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. I think that probably remains true, and so I'm going to take the Saints to win that game, and all of a sudden the Browns find themselves in a 4-game losing streak when they welcome in Houston in Week 10, right before the bye week. And I'm going to say the Browns end the losing streak, beat the Houston Texans with that really good defense, but this game feels like it could be like a slog of a game, especially if C.J. Stroud doesn't turn that corner to get back to being what he was early on in his career, his rookie season. But I think they find a way to upset the I guess you could call it an upset at this point, to beat the Houston Texans, and they go into the bye week with an overall record of 4-6. On the other side of the bye, you get Vegas out of it. This game's one that's tough for me because out of a bye, extra rest, all those things, yeah, I feel like the Browns should be set to win that one. And I don't know if the Raiders are going to be juggernauts, but I'm leaning into the idea that they revamped their roster a lot this year. They had guys like Tyler Linderbaum. Obviously, Max Crosby remains. Fernando Mendoza could be starting at this point in the season if he doesn't start the season just outright. I got a feeling that the Raiders, even coming east, could maybe steal this one. And part of this, too, is like the Browns always lose a game they shouldn't, and that feels like one of those games that they shouldn't lose because I don't think the Raiders are like way ahead of them in their rebuild, but I do think like they're going to present a tougher matchup than they used to in the past, and I think anything can happen. Feels like one of those games that maybe they just stumble and lose. They also are going to lose to Cincinnati at home in Week 13, so back-to-back losses out of the bye week. Not a good. That's a bad break for a new head coach coming out of the bye week to lose 2 straight. But the Falcons come to town, Week 14, game I wrote down as my most interesting matchup of the 2026 season. This is on December 13th, and I think that there's going to be a lot of emotions associated with that game. There's going to be a lot of I don't know, open wounds still between the two sides. And I think the Browns are going to come out and play some inspired football that week and find a way to win. They beat Kevin Stefanski in his return to Cleveland to get sort of back on track. But I have them losing in New York to the Giants in Week 15. I'm not picking, even though I like Todd Monken and what his offense is going to bring to the table, and he knows some of the tricks of the trade with John Harbaugh. I'm not picking against John Harbaugh. I think he builds something pretty productive there in New York. Ravens again, this time in Baltimore. Todd Monken's return to his old stomping grounds. I got Baltimore winning that one as well. Only team in the division that the Browns won't split with I have is Baltimore. They play the Colts at home in Week 17, and I have the Browns finishing out the season, much like they did last year, with back-to-back wins. They beat the Colts, who I'm not very high on. Daniel Jones and that Colts team, I think, were playing ahead of their skis last year. I'm taking a win at home in the home season finale in Week 17, and then you go to Cincy, and I'm going to say the Browns win in Week 18 as well, much like they did last year to finish off the campaign. Get an upset win over the Bengals, who might be resting people at that point, might have Joe Burrow injured at that point, might be playing for nothing at that point. The options are endless with that Bengals team, but I think they find a way to get another dramatic win maybe a game-winning drive situation to get that win and finish the season overall 7-10. All right, we did it. We played the schedule game. Give me your super early schedule game Browns predictions for the 2026 season. What record do you have them coming away with after the schedule was revealed on Thursday? And if you liked what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button to make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts and the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. If you never miss an episode, join the Everyday Club. It's your chance to get Locked On Browns totally ad-free, plus access to a members-only Discord channel where you can interact with myself and other hosts from around the network. Just head to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com, which is in the show notes, that link to learn more, or keep it local. Check out my friends at Locked On Cavs and Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will catch you next time, Cleveland.